Recorded Books presents an unabridged recording of Tar Baby by Toni Morrison, narrated by Lynn Thigpen. This work is copyrighted 1981 by Toni Morrison. This recording is copyrighted 2000 by Recorded Books. The place is a Caribbean island. In their mansion overlooking the sea, Valerian Street, now retired, and his pretty younger wife, Margaret, go through the rituals of living as if in a trance. And now, Tar Baby.
He believed he was safe. He stood at the railing of HMS Stor Königsgarten and sucked in great gulps of air, his heart pounding in sweet expectation as he stared at the harbor. Queen of France blushed a little in the lessening light and lowered her lashes before his gaze. 7 girlish white cruisers bobbed in the harbor, but a mile or so down current was a deserted pier. Carefully casual, he went below to the quarters he shared with the others, who had gone on shore leave, and since he had no things to gather, no book of postage stamps, no razor blade or key to any door, he merely folded more tightly the blanket corners under the mattress of his bunk. He took off his shoes and knotted the laces of each one through the belt hoop of his pants. Then, after a leisurely look around, he ducked through the passageway and returned to the top deck. He swung one leg over the railing, hesitated, and considered diving head first, but, trusting what his feet could tell him more than what his hands could, changed his mind and simply stepped away from the ship. The water was so soft and warm that it was up to his armpits before he realized he was in it. Quickly, he brought his knees to his chest and shot forward. He swam well. At each fourth stroke, he turned skyward and lifted his head to make sure his course was parallel to the shore, but away. Although his skin blended well with the dark waters, he was careful not to lift his arms too high above the waves. He gained on the pier and was gratified that his shoes still knocked softly against his hips. After a while, he thought it was time to head inland, toward the pier. As he scissored his legs for the turn, a bracelet of water circled them and yanked him into a wide, empty tunnel. He struggled to rise out of it and was turned 3 times. Just before the urge to breathe water became unmanageable, he was tossed up into the velvet air and laid smoothly down on the surface of the sea. He trod water for several minutes while he regulated his breathing. Then he struck out once more for the pier. Again the bracelet tightened around his ankles, and the wet throat swallowed him. He went down, down, and found himself not at the bottom of the sea as he expected, but whirling in a vortex. He thought nothing except, "I'm going counterclockwise." No sooner had he completed the thought than the sea flattened, and he was riding its top. Again he trod water, coughed, spat, and shook his head to free his ears of water. When he'd rested, he decided to swim butterfly and protect his feet from the sucking that had approached him both times from his right side. But when he tore open the water in front of him, he felt a gentle but firm pressure along his chest, stomach, and down his thighs. Like the hand of an insistent woman, it pushed him. He fought hard to break through, but couldn't. The hand was forcing him away from the shore. The man turned his head to see what lay behind him. All he saw was water, blood-tinted by a sun sliding into it like a fresh heart. Far away to his right was Stor Königsgarten, lit fore and aft. His strength was leaving him, and he knew he shouldn't waste it fighting the current. He decided to let it carry him for a while. Perhaps it would disappear. In any case, it would give him time to regain strength. He floated as best he could in water that heaved and pulsed in the ammonia-scented air, and was getting darker all the time. He knew he was in a part of the world that had never known and would never know twilight, and that very soon he might be zooming toward the horizon in a pitch-black sea. Queen of France was already showing lights scattered like teardrops from a sky pierced to weeping by the blade-tip of an early star. Still, the water lady cupped him in the palm of her hand and nudged him out to sea. Suddenly, he saw new lights, 4 of them, to his left. He couldn't judge the distance, but knew they had just been turned on aboard a small craft. Just as suddenly, the water lady removed her hand, and the man swam toward the boat anchored in blue water and not the green. As he neared it, he circled. He heard nothing and saw no one. Moving port side, he made out Seabird 2 and a 3-foot rope ladder gently tapping the bow. He grabbed a rung and hoisted himself up and aboard. Panting lightly, he padded across the deck. There was no trace of the sun, and his canvas shoes were gone. He sidled along the deck, his back against the walls of the wheelhouse, and looked into its curved windows. No one was there, but he heard music from below and smelled food cooked with a heavy dose of curry. He had nothing in mind to say if anyone suddenly appeared. It was better not to plan, not to have a ready-made story because, however tight, prepared stories sounded most like a lie. The sex, weight, the demeanor of whomever he encountered would inform and determine his tale. He made his way aft and cautiously descended a short flight of stairs. The music was louder there, and the smell of curry stronger. The farthest door stood ajar, and from it came the light, the music, and the curry. Nearer to him were 2 closed doors. He chose the first. It opened into a dark closet. The man stepped into it and closed the door softly after him. It smelled heavily of citrus and oil. Nothing was clear, so he squatted where he was and listened to what seemed to be radio or record player music. Slowly he moved his hand forward in the dark and felt nothing as far as his arm could reach. Moving it to the right, he touched a wall. He duck-waddled closer to it and sank to the floor, his back against the wall. He was determined to remain alert at all costs, but the water lady brushed his eyelids with her knuckles. He dropped into sleep like a rock. The engine didn't wake him. He had slept with the noise of heavier ones for years. Nor did the boat's list. Before the engines was the forgotten sound of a woman's voice, so new and welcoming it broke his dream life apart. He woke thinking of a short street of yellow houses with white doors, which women opened wide and called out, "Come on in here, you honey, you," their laughter sprawling like a quilt over the command. But nothing sprawled in this woman's voice. "I'm never lonely," it said. "Never." The man's scalp tingled. He licked his lips and tasted the salt caked in his mustache. "Never?" It was another woman's voice, lighter, half in doubt, half in awe. "Not at all," said the first woman. Her voice seemed warm on the inside, cold at the edges, or was it the other way around? "I envy you," said the second voice, but it was farther away now, floating upward, and accompanied by footsteps on stairs and the swish of cloth, corduroy against corduroy, or denim against denim, the sound only a woman's thighs could make. A delicious autumn invitation to come in out of the rain and curl up by the stove. The man couldn't hear the rest of their talk. They were topside now. He listened a while longer, and then stood up slowly, carefully, and reached for the doorknob. The passageway was brightly lit. The music and curry smell gone. Through the space between door jamb and door, he saw a porthole, and in it, deep night. Something crashed to the deck, and a moment later rolled to the door saddle where it stopped in a finger of light at his foot. It was a bottle, and he could just make out Bain de Soleil on the label. He didn't move. His mind was blank, but on call. He had not heard anyone descend, but now a woman's hand came into view. Beautifully shaped, pink nail polish, ivory fingers, wedding rings. She picked up the bottle, and he could hear her soft grunt as she stooped. She stood, and her hand disappeared. Her feet made no sound on the teak boards, but after a few seconds had passed, he heard a door, to the galley perhaps, open and close. He was the only man aboard. He felt it, a minus something, which eased him. The 2 or 3, he didn't know how many, women who were handling the boat would soon dock at a private pier, where there would be no customs inspectors stamping passports and furrowing his brow with importance. The light from the passage allowed him to examine the closet. It was a shelved storage room, with a mixture of snorkeling and fishing gear and ship's supplies. A topless crate took up most of the room on the floor. In it were 12 miniature orange trees, all bearing fruit. The man picked off one of the tiny oranges, no bigger than a good-sized strawberry, and ate it. The meat was soft, fiberless, and bitter. He ate another, and another. And as he ate, a wide surgical hunger opened up in him. He had not eaten since the night before, but the hunger that cut through him now was as unaccounted for as it was sudden. The boat was underway, and it didn't take him long to realize that they were headed out, not for Queen of France, after all. But not very far, he thought. Women with polished fingernails who needed suntan oil would not sail off into the night if they were going very far. So he chewed bitter oranges and waited on his haunches in the closet. When the boat finally drew along and the engine was cut, his hunger was no longer formal. It made him squeeze his fingers together to keep from bolting out of the closet toward the kitchen. But he waited until the light footsteps were gone. Then he stepped into the passageway, spotted in 2 places by moonlight. Topside, he watched 2 figures moving behind the beam of a heavy-duty flashlight. And when he heard a car's engine start up, he went below. Quickly he found the galley. But because lights would not do, he patted counter surfaces for matches. There weren't any, and the stove was electric. He opened a little refrigerator and discovered its bottled water and half a lime. Elsewhere in the refrigerator light, he located a jar of Dijon mustard, but nothing of the curry food. The dishes were rinsed, and so was a white carton. The women had not cooked. They had warmed up carry-out food that they'd brought aboard. The man ran his fingers deep into corners of the white carton and up its sides. Whatever had been left, they must have given to the gulls. He looked in the cupboards. Glasses, cups, dishes, a blender, candles, plastic straws, multicolored toothpicks, and at last, a box of Norwegian flatbread. He covered the bread with mustard, ate it, and drank all that was left of the bottled water before going back on deck. There he saw the stars, and exchanged stares with the moon. But he could see very little of the land, which was just as well, because he was gazing at the shore of an island that 300 years ago had struck slaves blind the moment they saw it. Chapter 1. The end of the world, as it turned out, was nothing more than a collection of magnificent winter houses on Ile des Chevaliers. When laborers imported from Haiti came to clear the land, clouds and fish were convinced that the world was over, that the sea-green green of the sea and the sky-blue sky of the sky were no longer permanent. Wild parrots that had escaped the stones of hungry children in Queen of France agreed, and raised havoc as they flew away to look for yet another refuge. Only the champion daisy trees were serene. After all, they were part of a rainforest already 2,000 years old, and scheduled for eternity. So they ignored the men, and continued to rock the diamondbacks that slept in their arms. It took the river to persuade them that indeed the world was altered, that never again would the rain be equal, and by the time they realized it, and had run their roots deeper, clutching the earth like lost boys found, it was too late. The men had already folded the earth where there had been no fold, and hollowed her where there had been no hollow, which explains what happened to the river. It crested, then lost its course, and finally its head. Evicted from the place where it had lived, and forced into unknown turf, it could not form its pools or waterfalls, and ran every which way. The clouds gathered together, stood still, and watched the river scuttle around the forest floor, crash headlong into the haunches of hills with no notion of where it was going, until exhausted, ill and grieving, it slowed to a stop, just 20 leagues short of the sea. The clouds looked at each other, then broke apart in confusion. Fish heard their hooves as they raced off to carry the news of the scatterbrained river to the peaks of hills and the tops of the champion daisy trees. But it was too late. The men had gnawed through the daisy trees until, wild-eyed and yelling, they broke in two and hit the ground. In the huge silence that followed their fall, orchids spiraled down to join them. When it was over, and houses instead grew in the hills, those trees that had been spared dreamed of their comrades for years afterward, and their nightmare mutterings annoyed the diamondbacks, who left them for the new growth that came to life in spaces the sun saw for the first time. Then the rain changed, and was no longer equal. Now it rained not just for an hour every day at the same time, but in seasons, abusing the river even more. Poor, insulted, broken-hearted river. Poor, demented stream. Now it sat in one place like a grandmother, and became a swamp the Haitians called Saint de Vieille, and which its tit it was. A shriveled, fog-bound oval, seeping with a thick black substance that even mosquitoes could not live near. But high above it were hills, and vales so bountiful it made visitors tired to look at them. Bougainvillea, avocado, poinsettia, lime, banana, coconut, and the last of the rainforest's champion trees. Of the houses built there, the oldest and most impressive was L'Arbre de la Croix. It had been designed by a brilliant Mexican architect, but the Haitian laborers had no union and therefore could not distinguish between craft and art. So while the panes did not fit their sashes, the windowsills and door saddles were carved lovingly to perfection. They sometimes forgot or ignored the determination of water to flow downhill, so the toilets and bidets could not always produce a uniformly strong swirl of water. But the eaves were so wide and deep that the windows could be left open even in a storm, and no rain could enter the rooms, only wind, scents, and torn-away leaves. The floor planks were tongue and groove, but the hand-kiln tiles from Mexico, though beautiful to behold, loosened at a touch. Yet the doors were plumb, and their knobs, hinges, and locks secure as turtles. It was a wonderful house, wide, breezy, and full of light, built in the day when plaster was taken for granted, and with the sun and the airstream in mind, it needed no air conditioning. Graceful landscaping kept the house just under a surfeit of beauty. Every effort had been made to keep it from looking designed. Almost nothing was askew, and the few things that were had charm. The little island touches here and there, a wash house, a kitchen garden, for example, were practical. At least that was the judgment of discriminating visitors. They all agreed that except for the unfortunate choice of its name, it was the most handsomely articulated and blessedly unrhetorical house in the Caribbean. One or two had reservations, wondered whether all that interior sunlight wasn't a little too robust, and hadn't the owner gone rather overboard with the recent addition of a greenhouse. Valerian Street was mindful of their criticism, but completely indifferent to it. Gray eyes drifted over the faces of such guests like a 4 o'clock shadow on its way to twilight. They reminded him of the Philadelphia widows who, when they heard he was going to spend the whole first year of his retirement in his island house, said, "You'll be back 6 months, and you'll be bored out of your mind." That was 4 Decembers ago, and the only things he missed were hydrangea and the postman. The new greenhouse made it possible to reproduce a hydrangea, but the postman was lost to him forever. The rest of what he loved he brought with him: some records, garden shears, a 64-bulb chandelier, a light blue tennis shirt, and the principal beauty of Maine. Ferreira Brothers, domestic and international, took care of the rest, and with the help of 2 servants, the principal beauty, and mounds of careful correspondence, he was finally installed for a year on a hill high enough to watch the sea from 3 sides. Not that he was interested. Beyond its providing the weather that helped or prevented the steamers bringing mail, he never gave the sea a thought. And whatever he did think about, he thought it privately in his greenhouse. In the late afternoons, when the heat had to be taken seriously, and early in the morning, he was there. Long before the principal beauty had removed her sleeping mask, he turned the switch that brought the Goldberg variations into the greenhouse. At first, he'd experimented with Chopin and some of the Russians, but the Magnum Rex peonies, overwhelmed by all that passion, whined and curled their lips. He settled finally on Bach for germination, Haydn and Liszt for strong sprouting. After that, all of the plants seemed content with Rampal's Rondo in D. By the time he sugared his breakfast coffee, the peonies, the anemones, and all their kind had heard 40 or 50 minutes of music, which nourished them, but set Sidney, the butler's, teeth on edge, although he'd heard some variety of it every day for 40 years. What made it bearable now was that the music was confined to the greenhouse, and not swarming all through the house as it often did back in Philadelphia. He could hear it only thinly now, as he wiped moisture beads from a glass of iced water with a white napkin. He set it near the cup and saucer, and noticed how much the liver spots had faded on his employer's hand. Mr. Street thought it was the lotion he rubbed on nightly, but Sidney thought it was the natural tanning of the skin in this place they had all come to 3 years ago. Except for the kitchen, which had a look of permanence, the rest of the house had a hotel feel about it, a kind of sooner or later leaving appearance. A painting or 2 hung in an all-right place, but none was actually stationed or properly lit. The really fine china was still boxed and waiting for a decision nobody was willing to make. It was hard to serve well in the tentativeness. No crystal available. It, too, was closed away in Philadelphia, so a few silver trays had to do for everything from fruit to petits fours. Every now and then, the principal beauty, on one of her trips, brought back from the States another carton chock full of something Sidney asked for: the blender, the carborundum stone, 2 more tablecloths. These items had to be carefully selected, because they were exchanged for other items that she insisted on taking back to Philadelphia. It was her way of keeping intact the illusion that they still lived in the States, but were wintering near Dominique. Her husband encouraged her fantasy by nodding every loose string of conversation with the observation, "It can wait till we get home." 6 months after they'd arrived, Sidney told his wife that periodic airing of trunk luggage in the sunlight was more habit than intention. They would have to tear down that greenhouse to get him off the island, because as long as it was there, he'd be there too. "What the devil does he do in there?" she had asked him. Relaxes a little, that's all. Drinks a bit, reads, listens to records. Can't nobody spend every day in a shed for 3 years without being up to some devilment, she said. It's not a shed, said Sidney. It's a greenhouse, I keep telling you. Whatever you call it. He grows hydrangeas in there, and dahlias. If he wants hydrangeas, he should go back home. He hauls everybody down to the equator to grow northern flowers. It's not just that. Remember how he liked his study back at the house? Well, it's like that, except it's a greenhouse kind of a study. Anybody build a greenhouse on the equator ought to be shamed. This is not the equator. Could have fooled me. Nowhere near it. You mean there's someplace on this planet hotter than this? I thought you liked it here. Love it. Then stop complaining. It's because I do love it that I'm complaining. I'd like to know if it's permanent. Living like this, you can't figure nothing. He might pack up any minute and trot off someplace else. He'll be here till he dies, Sidney told her. Lest that greenhouse burns up. Well, I'll pray nothing happens to it, she said. But she needn't have. Valerian took very good care of the greenhouse, for it was a nice place to talk to his ghosts in peace, while he transplanted, fed, air-layered, rooted, watered, dried, and thinned his plants. He kept a small refrigerator of Blanc de Blancs, and read seed catalogues while he sipped the wine. Sometimes he gazed through the little greenhouse panes at the wash-house. Other times he checked catalogues, brochures, and entered into ringing correspondence with nurseries from Tokyo to Newburgh, New York. He read only mail these days, having given up books because the language in them had changed so much, stained with rivulets of disorder and meaninglessness. He loved the greenhouse and the island, but not his neighbors. Luckily, there was a night 3 years ago, after he'd first settled into tropic life, when he woke up with a toothache so brutal it lifted him out of bed and knocked him to his knees. He knelt on the floor, clutching the Billy Blast sheets and thinking, this must be a stroke. No tooth could do this to me. Directly above the waves of pain, his left eye was crying, while his right went dry with rage. He crawled to the night table and pressed the button that called Sidney. When he arrived, Valerian insisted on being taken to Queen of France at once. But there was no way to get there. At that hour, fishermen had not even begun to stir, and the launch was twice a week. They owned no boat, and even if they had, neither Sidney nor anyone else could handle it. So the quick-witted butler telephoned the neighbors Valerian hated, and got both the use of a 56-foot palaus, called Seabird II, and the boat skills of the Filipino houseboy. After a daring jeep ride in the dark, an interminable boat ride, and a taxi ride that was itself a memory, they arrived at Dr. Michelin's door at 2 a.m. Sidney banged while the Filipino chatted with the taxi driver. The dentist roared out the second-floor window. He had been run out of Algeria and thought his door was being assaulted by local blacks, whose teeth he would not repair. At last, Valerian, limp and craven, sat in the dentist's chair, where he gave himself up to whatever the Frenchman had in mind. Dr. Michelin positioned a needle toward the roof of Valerian's mouth, but seemed to change his mind at the last minute, for Valerian felt the needle shoot straight into his nostril, on up to the pupil of his eye and out his left temple. He stretched his hand toward the doctor's trousers, hoping that his death grip, the one they always had to pry loose, would be found to contain the crushed balls of a DDS. But before he could get a grip under the plaid bathrobe, the pain disappeared, and Valerian wept outright, grateful for the absence of all sensation in his head. Dr. Michelin didn't do another thing. He just sat down and poured himself a drink, eyeing his patient in silence. This encounter, born in encouraged hatred, ended in affection. The good doctor let Valerian swallow a little of his brandy through a straw and against his better judgment, and Valerian recognized a man who took his medical oaths seriously. They got good and drunk together that night, and the combination of Novocaine and brandy gave Valerian an expansiveness he had not felt in years. They visited each other occasionally, and whenever Valerian thought of that first meeting, he touched the place where the abscess had been and smiled. It had a comic book quality about it. Two elderly men drunk and quarreling about Pershing, whom Valerian had actually seen, neither one mentioning then or ever the subject of exile or advanced years, which was what they had in common. Both felt as though they had been run out of their homes. Robert Michelet, expelled from Algeria. Valerian Street, voluntarily exiled from Philadelphia. Both had been married before, and the long years of a second marriage had done nothing to make either forget his first. The memory of those years of grief in the wake of a termagant was still keen. Michelet had remarried within a year of his divorce, but Valerian stayed a bachelor for a long time, and on purpose, until he went out for an after-lunch stroll on a wintry day in Maine, a stroll he hoped would get rid of the irritable boredom he'd felt among all those food industry appliance reps. His walk from the inn had taken him only 2 blocks to the main street, when he found himself in the middle of a local snow carnival parade. He saw the polar bear, and then he saw her. The bear was standing on its hind feet, its front ones raised in benediction. A rosy-cheeked girl was holding onto one of the bear's forefeet, like a bride. The plastic igloo behind them threw into dazzling relief her red velvet coat and the ermine muff she waved to the crowd. The moment he saw her, something inside him knelt down. Now he sat in the December sunlight, watching his servant pour coffee into his cup. "Has it come?" "Sir?" "The salve." "Not yet." Sidney removed the lid from a tiny box of saccharine tablets and edged it toward his employer. "They take their sweet time. Mail's cut back to twice a week, I told you. It's been a month. 2 weeks. Still bothering you?" "Not right this minute, but they'll start up again." Valerian reached for the sugar cubes. "You could be a little less hard-headed about those shoes. Sandals or a nice pair of huaraches all day would clear up every one of them bunions." "They're not bunions. They're corns." Valerian plopped the cubes into his cup. "Corns, too. When you get your medical degree, call me. Undine baked these?" "No. Mrs. Street brought them back yesterday." "She uses that boat like a bicycle. Back and forth, back and forth." "Why don't you get one of your own?" "That thing's too big for her. Can't water ski with it. Can't even dock it in the town. They have to leave it at one place and get in another little boat just to land." "Why should I buy her a boat and let it sit 10 months out of a year? If those nitwits don't mind her using theirs, it's fine with me." "Maybe she'd stay the whole year if she had one." "Not likely. And I prefer she should stay because her husband's here, not because the boat is. Anyway, tell Undine not to serve them anymore." "No good? One of the worst things about being old is eating. First, you have to find something you can eat, and second, you have to try not to drop it all over yourself." "I wouldn't know about that." "Of course not. You're 15 minutes younger than I am. Nevertheless, tell Undine no more of these. Too flaky. They fly all over no matter what I do. Croissant's supposed to be flaky. That's as short a dough as you can make. Just tell her, Sidney." "Yes, sir." "And find out if the boy can straighten those bricks. They are popping up all over the place." "He needs cement," he said. No cement. He's to pack them down properly. The soil will hold them if he does it right." "Yes, sir." "Mrs. Street awake?" "I believe so. Anything else special you going to want for the holidays?" "No, just the geese. I won't be able to eat a bit of it, but I want to see it on the table anyway. And some more thalamide." You want Yardman to bring you phthalimide? He can't even pronounce it. Write a note. Tell him to give it to Dr. Michelin. All right. And tell Undine that half postum and half coffee is revolting. Worse than postum alone. Okay. She thought it would help. I know what she thought, but the help is worse than the problem. That might not be what the trouble is, you know. You are determined to make me have an ulcer. I don't have an ulcer. You have an ulcer. I have occasional irregularity. I had an ulcer. It's gone now, and postum helped it go. I'm delighted. Did you say she was awake? She was. Could have gone back to sleep, though. What did she want? Want? Yes, want. The only way you could know she was awake is if she rang you up there. What did she want? Towels. Fresh towels. Sydney? She did. Undine forgot to... What were the towels wrapped around? Why you keep thinking that? Everything she drinks, you see her drink. A little dinner wine, that's all, and hardly more than a glass of that. She never was a drinker. You the one. Why are you always trying to make her into one? I'll speak to Jade. What could Jade know that I don't? Nothing, but she's as honest as they come. Come on now, Mr. Street, it's the truth. Valerian held a pineapple quarter with his fork and began cutting small, regular pieces from it. All right, said Sydney. I'll tell you. She wanted Yardman to stop by the airport before he comes Thursday. What for, pray? A trunk. She's expecting a trunk. It's been shipped already, she said, and ought to be here by then. What an idiot. Sir? Idiot. Mrs. Street, sir? Mrs. Street, Mr. Street, you, Undine, everybody. This is the first time in 30 years I've been able to enjoy this house. Really live in it. Not for a month or a weekend, but for a while. And everybody is conspiring to ruin it for me. Coming and going and coming. It's beginning to feel like 30th Street Station. Why can't everybody just settle down, relax, have a nice, simple Christmas? Not a throng, just a nice, simple Christmas dinner. She gets a little bored, I guess. Got more time than she can use. Insane. Jade's here. They get on like schoolgirls, it seems to me. Am I wrong? No, you're right. They get along fine, like each other's company, both of them. They don't like it enough to let it go at that. Apparently, we are expecting more company. And since I am merely the owner and operator of this hotel, there's no reason to let me know about it. Can I get you some toast? And you have finally surprised me. What else have you been keeping from me? Eat your pineapple. I am eating it. I can't stand here all morning. You got corns, I got bunions. If you won't take my advice, bunions are the consequence. I know my work. I'm a first-rate butler, and I can't be first-rate in slippers. You know your work, but I know your feet. Tom McCann will be the death of you. I never wore Tom McCanns in my life. Never. In 1929, I didn't wear them. I distinctly recall at least 4 pairs of decent shoes I've given you. I prefer my bunions to your corns. Valleys don't cause corns. If anything, they prevent them. It's the perspiration that causes them. See? Gotcha. That's exactly what I've been telling you. Philadelphia shoes don't work in the tropics, make your feet sweat. You need some nice huaraches. Make your feet feel good. Free them up so they can breathe. The day I spend in huaraches is the day I spend in a straitjacket. You keep on hacking away at your toes with a razor, you'll beg for a straitjacket. Well, you won't know about it because your Tom McCann bunions are going to put you in a rocker for the rest of your life. Suit me fine. And me. Maybe then I could hire somebody who wouldn't keep things from me. Sneak post him into a good pot of coffee, saccharin in the lime pie, and don't think I don't know about the phony salt. Health is the most important thing at our age, Mr. Street. Not at all. It's the least important. I have no intention of staying alive just so I can wake up and skip down the stairs to a cup of postum in the morning. Look in the cabinet. Get me a drop of medicine for this stuff. Cognac's not medicine. Sidney moved toward the sideboard and bent to open one of its doors. At 70, everything is medicine. Tell Undine to quit it. It's not doing a thing for me. Sure don't help your disposition none. Exactly. Now, very quietly and very quickly, tell me who this company is. No company, Mr. Street. Don't antagonize an old man reduced to postum. It's your son. Michael's not company. Valerian put his cup carefully onto the saucer. She told you that. Then Michael was coming. No, not exactly. But so Yardman would know what to look for, she told me where the trunk was coming from and what color it was. Then it's coming from California. It's coming from California. And it's red. And it's red. Fire red. With Dick Gregory for president stickers pasted on the side. And a bull's eye painted on the lid. And a lock that only closes if you kick it, but opens with the hairpin. And the key is... Valerian stopped and looked up at Sidney. Sidney looked at Valerian. They said it together. At the top of Kilimanjaro. Some joke, said Valerian. Pretty good for a 7-year-old. They were quiet for a while. Valerian chewing pineapple, Sidney leaning against the sideboard. Then Valerian said, Why do you suppose he hangs on to it? A boy's camp footlocker. Keep his clothes in. Foolish. All of it. The trunk, him, and this visit besides. He won't show. She thinks so this time. She's not thinking. She's dreaming, poor baby. Are you sure there was nothing between those towels? Here comes the lady. Ask her yourself.
This ends side 1 of cassette 1. Please turn the cassette over and start side 2 at the same point.